Kansas Territory, June 1871. The air was thick with dust and smoke as screams echoed down Main Street in the sunburnt town of Clearwater. Sylva Hargrove ran barefoot, skirts torn and face streaked with blood not her own. Behind her, a mob of ranchers, drunk on heat and fury, shouted her name like it was a curse. "She killed him," one man hollered. "Hang the witch," another barked. Sylva did not look back. She clutched her young daughter, Alma, tight to her chest. Blood soaked the little girl's dress at the shoulder, where a bullet had grazed her during the chaos. They had come for her after her husband, Clayton, was found dead in their barn with a knife in his side. The same knife he had held to Alma's throat the night before. Sylva had not killed him, but she had prayed someone would. Alma whimpered. "Mama." "I got you, baby," Sylva whispered, voice shaking. Ahead the crowd thickened. Men with ropes, women with stones, and then gunfire, not wild like the mob's pistols, calm, controlled. One shot into the air. "Back off," a man's voice rang out, low, firm, and cold. The mob stilled. On horseback, the rider was dressed in dust-worn black. His rifle was steady, eyes hidden under the brim of a weathered hat. Sylva froze, Alma still clutched to her chest, staring up at the stranger. "I don't know who you are," the sheriff stammered, stepping forward, "but this ain't." "She's coming with me," the man interrupted. "She's got a shot child and no trial has been called. You want to hang someone, you'll have to shoot through me first." A long silence. One rancher stepped forward. "You cannot just ride in here," and the man's rifle didn't move, but his horse did. A step forward. "Try me." The crowd shifted, uncertain now, their fury cooling under the weight of a man who looked like he had seen worse. And then, slowly, they backed away. Sylva stood there, eyes wide, legs trembling. The cowboy dismounted. "Come on," he said, voice softer now. "We need to get your daughter to a doctor." Sylva stared at him. "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her for the first time, really looked. "Because someone should have helped sooner." They rode hard, Sylva behind him on his horse, holding Alma as the child cried into her shoulder. They stopped 2 miles out at a small cabin hidden under cottonwoods. The man carried Alma inside and set her on a cot with surprising gentleness, then worked fast, cleaning the wound. Sylva watched him, hands shaking. "I need your name," she said finally. "Illan Mercer," he said, not looking up. "Used to be with the 8th Cavalry. Now I keep to myself," she swallowed. "I'm Sylva Hargrove, that's Alma." He nodded once. "She'll be all right. Bullet just scraped her." Sylva let out a breath and sank into the nearest chair. Illan stood and washed his hands in a basin. "You want to tell me what happened?" Sylva stared at the floor. "My husband was a mean man, started drinking heavy after the war, took it out on me, on her." She glanced at Alma. "Last night he came into her room with a knife. I tried to stop him. I could not. He was dead by morning." Illan didn't ask who killed him. Instead, he walked to the hearth and tossed another log on the fire. "You ever shot a gun before?" Her head lifted. "What?" He met her eyes. "You need to know how. That town's not going to forget. Even if you did not kill him, they will not care." She did not answer. He crossed the room and crouched beside her chair. "So, you want a husband to protect you?" His voice was low, steady. "Or a gun to do it yourself?" Sylva stared at him. Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I am not offering both," he added. Her throat tightened. "I do not need a husband." A slow nod. "Then I will teach you the gun." And he did. For days they stayed at the cabin. Alma healed slowly, clinging to her mother. Sylva learned how to load, aim, fire. Her hands stopped shaking. Her eyes grew sharper. They rarely spoke of feelings. But Illan watched her when she was not looking. And sometimes, when she sat near the fire, he would sit a little closer than needed. One evening, after Alma had fallen asleep wrapped in a quilt, Sylva sat on the porch with Illan beside her. I do not know why you helped me, she said quietly. He looked out at the stars. Because I saw a man like your husband once when I was a boy. He beat a woman until she could barely walk. I did nothing. She turned her head. I was 10, he said. Still. I never forgot. Silva's hand brushed his on the porch rail, not accidental. He did not pull away. Illan, she whispered. He looked at her, and she kissed him. It was not rushed or frantic, just quiet, certain. When it ended, her forehead rested against his. He whispered, "You still want a gun?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I think I might want both." He laughed once, soft and surprised. "All right, then." And for the first time in years, she felt safe. Not because he had saved her, but because he saw her, all of her, and stayed. The wind shifted east that morning, bringing the scent of wet cottonwood bark and the low murmur of river water cutting through the ravine behind the cabin. Illan stood by the fence post, sleeves rolled, mending a break in the wire. His hands worked slow but sure, as if the rhythm steadied him more than the task demanded. Inside, Silva stitched new sleeves onto Alma's one good dress. The girl slept curled on a pallet near the hearth, her fever broken sometime near dawn. She hadn't spoken much since arriving, but her breathing had grown deeper, steadier. Silva pushed the needle through the calico and glanced at the door. "You always lie alone like this." Her voice was soft, but it carried. Illan didn't look up from the post. "Since I left the army. I tried staying in Wichita once. Towns aren't for me. You built this place? Mostly. Found the bones of it rotting out here. Figured no one else would care to claim it." She finished a stitch, tied it off, then folded the dress across her lap. "You don't talk like a drifter." "I'm not a drifter." He turned then, brushing dirt from his palms. "I just don't see the point of staying where folks only remember what you were, not what you are." Silva rose, careful not to wake Alma, and stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under her bare feet. "What do they remember?" He leaned against the post. "That I did things to stay alive in the war, same as most." He paused. "But I never liked being looked at like I didn't come back clean." She studied him a moment. "You did come back. That counts for something." Illan's gaze met hers, steady beneath the brim of his hat. "So did you." They stood quiet for a while. A hawk cried somewhere overhead, circling lazy, wide arcs through the sky. Silva crossed her arms. "You think I should go back, face them?" He shook his head. "If you do, it has to be because you want to, not because you think you owe them anything." "I don't owe them," she said, voice firm. "Then no, don't go back." She stepped off the porch and moved toward the fence, eyes on the prairie beyond. "There's a woman down by the river who used to take in orphans. Miss Nella, she might still be there." "You thinking of leaving Alma there?" Silva turned quickly, eyes sharp. "No, only that she might have space. A room, maybe." "I can't keep living off your kindness." Illan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "It's not kindness, it's choice. And if I chose to stay longer," he looked at her, then truly looked, "then I'd fix up the second room and build another cot." She let the silence settle between them again. Then she said, "Clayton used to tell me I was only good for keeping house and bearing children." Illan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I started believing it," she continued, "until I held a rifle and saw my hands didn't shake anymore." "You're not that woman anymore," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, "but I don't know who I am yet." "You don't have to," he said. "Not all at once." That night, after Alma had eaten a small bowl of beans and fallen asleep curled against her mother, Silva stepped outside again. The moon was low, casting long silver shadows across the dirt yard. Illan was at the edge of the clearing, tending to the horse. She walked to him, arms folded against the cooling air. "She's asking questions now," Silva said. "About what happens next." He adjusted the saddle blanket, then glanced her way. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." She hesitated. "But I want to." He nodded once, then turned, voice low. You need a place of your own, a way to earn. If you still want a break from that life, I know a widow west of Medicine Lodge. She runs a boarding stable. Could use help. Silva frowned. You want me to go? No, he said. But I want you to have the choice. She studied him. You always give people choices, he shrugged. 15 years ago, I watched a man lose everything because someone else chose for him. I swore I'd never be that kind of man. Silva stepped closer. Illan, if I stayed, not just for shelter, what would that mean to you? He looked down at her hand. It was resting near his on the saddle horn, the space between them no wider than breath. It would mean I'd stop setting cots in separate rooms, he said, and start carving a place where all three of us could fit. She didn't answer right away. She just leaned in, rested her head against his shoulder, and let the silence speak for her. The horse shifted under its halter. Somewhere in the trees, a night bird called. He didn't move from her, didn't ask anything more. Just stood with her in the hush of it all, as if he understood that love, real love, came not in the asking but in the waiting. The boarding stable sat a half-day's ride west of the Medicine Lodge River, tucked behind a low ridge where the prairie broke into patches of cedar scrub. They arrived just past midday, dust rising off the trail behind them in lazy spirals. Illan rode ahead with a quiet watchfulness, eyes scanning the horizon. Silva followed on his second horse, Alma wrapped against her back, head resting on her shoulder like she'd done since leaving the cabin. The widow, Mrs. Corrine Ellerby, met them at the gate. She was middle-aged with a sun-leathered face and a sharp, intelligent mouth. She looked Silva over, then glanced at Illan. She yours? She asked, voice flat as a skillet. Silva answered before Illan could. I'm my own. Corrine gave a nod like that settled something. Good. I don't take to women who wait on men to decide things for him. She showed Silva the bunkhouse, a lean-to with 2 cots and a wood stove, and the main stable, where 7 horses stood in their stalls. I got more space than hands, she said. You help with the feeding, mucking, and tack repairs, and I'll give you bed and board. Girl can stay in the house with me till she's strong on her feet. Silva didn't hesitate. I'll work. Corrine turned to Illan. And you? I'll ride back east, he said. I've got supplies to fetch. He looked at Silva then. They hadn't spoken of parting until now. She met his eyes. Will you come back, if you're here? I will be. That night, after Alma was settled in a small room off Corrine's kitchen, Silva sat on the porch steps, boots unlaced, hands calloused and sore from the day's labor. The air was thick with the scent of horses and sun-warmed hay. Corrine joined her, carrying 2 tin cups of whiskey. You've got strong hands, she said, handing one over. Not many women could rein in a stallion like you did this morning. I didn't know I could, Silva said, sipping slow. Corrine leaned back against the post. That man who brought you, he yours or not? Silva looked out across the dark fields. He's not mine to keep, but I think he wants to stay. Corrine took a long swallow. Men like that don't come often. The kind who'll stand between you and a bullet without asking for anything in return. Silva nodded. He asked me if I wanted a husband or a gun. Corrine laughed low in her throat. Smart man, knows the difference. I didn't before. The next morning, Illan rode back out toward Clearwater. Silva watched him from the corral gate. Alma perched on the fence beside her, small hands gripping the wood. He didn't look back, but she knew he would return. Days passed. Then a week. The sun hardened Silva's skin, and work gave her muscles she hadn't known she could build. At night, Alma curled against her in the bunkhouse, and they slept without fear. One afternoon, Corrine handed her a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Found this in the loft. Was my husband's. He had no use for it after the fever took him. Silva unwrapped it. A Colt revolver, clean and oiled. Not new, but well kept. You know how to use it, Corinne asked. I do, Silva said. Good, keep it close. Not all men forget a face just because it's out of sight. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a rider came up the trail. Alma spotted him first and ran, her small legs kicking up dust as she shouted his name. Illan dismounted with a quiet breath and caught her in his arms. Silva stood in the doorway, arms crossed. What took you? He set Alma down and walked toward her, slower than he needed to. Had to make sure no one was still looking for you. Spoke with your old sheriff, she stiffened. And? He knows you didn't kill Clayton. Your neighbor, Levy Thomas, came forward. Said he found your husband that morning, knife still in his hand. He didn't want to speak before. Said it wasn't his fight. Silva's mouth pressed into a line. Of course he didn't. I told the sheriff if anyone came looking, I'd be waiting. Was that wise? Illan shrugged. Didn't come here to be wise. She stepped off the porch, hands at her sides. Why did you come? He looked at her then, the kind of look that didn't ask for answers, only offered them. I came because I want to stay. Silva reached for his hand and held it. Then make yourself useful. Corinne's got fence posts that need sinking. He laughed, a real sound deep in his chest. You putting me to work already? I'm not keeping a cowboy who doesn't earn his place. I'll earn it, he said. Every day. That night they sat by the hearth in the bunkhouse, Alma asleep again near the wall. Illan's hand rested on Silva's knee, her head against his shoulder. The fire cast long shadows across the walls, soft and flickering. I don't know what comes next, she said quietly. We'll build it, he replied, and she believed him. By mid-July, the heat swelled heavy along the prairie, curling the grasses and driving the horses to shade before noon. Silva rose each morning before the sun crested the ridge, her hands already busy before the sky had burned away its last stars. She'd taken to the work with a kind of quiet fierceness, oiling tack, hauling feed, checking hooves for stone bruises while Alma helped Corinne with the hens and learned to braid rope for the mules. Illan stayed, just as he said he would. He slept in the lean-to beside the barn, but ate his meals on the porch steps beside Silva, his long frame folded easily, as though he'd always belonged there. He never pressed her, never assumed, but his steadiness rooted itself in her days, growing stronger in the places where her life had once been thin and brittle. One evening, after the sun had sunk behind the cedar ridge, Silva found him sharpening a drawknife by the woodpile. The scent of sawdust clung to his shirt, and his fingertips bore the faint red of fresh blisters. I thought you were fixing fence, she said, leaning against the post beside him. Was, he replied. But Corinne's got a busted cradle leg in the back room, said she meant to burn it. Figured I'd try mending it first. Silva tilted her head. You build cradles now, I build what's needed. She watched the blade glint in the dusk, his movements slow and practiced. You've got a way with broken things. He paused, setting the knife down. That why you let me stay? I let you stay because Alma stopped waking up crying when you were near. He looked at her then, not startled, just quiet. I think she sees what you haven't yet. And what's that? That I'd carry both of you through fire without being asked. Silva crossed her arms. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not, he said, but I want to build something that lasts. Not watch the years pass through someone else's door. She stepped closer, the air between them warm with the scent of cedar and wood smoke. You think we could have something real here? I don't believe in things that come easy, he said. But I believe in you. Inside, Alma's small voice carried through the open window, asking Corinne to tell her a story about the river horses. Silva reached for Illan's hand, rough and warm in her grasp. My mother used to say that if a man couldn't plant roots, he'd never carry shade. Then let me lay mine down here, he said, fingers closing gently around hers. They moved together without ceremony, No grand promises, only the steady joining of lives shaped by hardship and hardened by choice. That night, Illan moved his bedroll into the far corner of the bunkhouse, not because they rushed things, but because silence had shifted between them, no longer empty but full. Weeks passed. Corinne left for Wichita to trade horses, leaving the stable in Silva's care. Alma grew stronger, her limp fading with each day of walking the fence line beside Illan. The land began to green again with late summer storms, and the wind carried less dust and more promise. One afternoon, Silva returned from the southern pasture to find Illan and Alma on their knees beneath the cottonwood, hammering wooden pegs into the earth. "What are you two up to?" she called, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Alma looked up, grinning. "We're making a bench." "For you?" Illan kept his eyes on the board. "Figured you could use a place to sit where the breeze hits just right." Silva walked over and crouched beside them. The bench was rough, the grain uneven but solid. She touched the edge, then looked at Illan. "You build what's needed," she murmured. His smile was faint but steady. "That's the plan." Silva rose and brushed her palms clean. "Then I reckon it's time we talk about what's next." Illan stood as well, dusting off his knees. "I was hoping you'd say that." That evening they sat on the new bench beneath the cottonwood, Alma curled at Silva's side. The leaves rustled above them, and in the distance, crickets began their hymn. Silva reached for Illan's hand. "I don't want to raise her halfway. I want her to grow up knowing what steadiness looks like." "She's already seen it," he said. "I want to build a real home," she said. "One with stone in the foundation, not just borrowed rooms and patched roofs." Illan looked out over the pasture. "There's a piece of land north of here. Old homestead. Couple of collapsed walls and a well that still runs. It's not much, but it's a beginning." Silva's voice was quiet. "Will you build it with me?" He didn't answer with words. He just leaned in and kissed her slow and certain, like he was sealing a promise into the marrow of the years ahead. And when they stood, hands clasped, the prairie stretched out wide and waiting before them. Not empty, not uncertain, just open, just theirs. By late August, the land had turned to gold. Sunlight slid across the fields like warm syrup, and the sound of crickets filled the dusk like breath. Silva stood beside the old well on the north plot, letting the bucket drop with a soft splash. When she hauled it up, the water was clean and cold, and she smiled to herself, satisfied. Illan stepped up behind her, carrying a length of timber across one shoulder and a folding draw-knife in his free hand. His shirt clung to his back, damp from labor, and his voice was low when he spoke. "Roof beams are set. If I get the rafters cut by nightfall, we can start laying shingles tomorrow." Silva poured the water into a crock and passed it to him. "You think we'll have walls before the frost comes?" "We'll have walls before the next full moon," he said, drinking deep. "I'll sleep under the stars if I have to, but I want you both under a roof before the wind turns." She nodded and wiped her hands on her skirt. "Corinne offered us her wagon frame, said she's not using it anymore. I can strip it down and use the iron braces for the back door." He set the crock down and looked at her. "You've got the eye for building now." "I've been watching," she said, "and learning." He stepped closer, his thumb brushing a smear of dust from her cheek. "That's what I love about you. You don't wait to be told, you just figure the thing and do it." Silva scoffed softly. "Not sure that's always a virtue. It is when everything worth keeping's been built with hands like yours." She didn't answer, just leaned her forehead against his chest for a moment and let herself rest there, just long enough to feel the steady rhythm of his heart beneath his shirt. Alma's voice called from the edge of the clearing. "Mama, come see." They followed the sound to where the girl stood near the young cottonwood they'd planted last week. She pointed to the base, where a pair of pale blue wildflowers had sprouted in the shade. "They weren't there yesterday," she said, eyes wide. Silva crouched beside her. "This land's been waiting a long time to grow again." Illan knelt too. "That's how it is. Sometimes things bloom when they're ready, not when you expect." That night, Corinne came by with a basket of late tomatoes and a bolt of muslin. She stayed just long enough to sit for a spell on the unfinished porch frame, watching Alma braid scraps of fabric into doll hair while the sun sloped low. "You done well with her," she said to Silva. "She's strong in ways some grown women never learn to be." Silva nodded. "She earned every bit of that strength." Corinne stood and dusted off her skirt. "If you ever need extra hands come winter, you send word. I'll ride out." After she left, Silva and Illan sat on the porch frame and watched the moon rise in a sliver, sharp and white. "I got a question," Illan said, turning the ring box over in his palm. It wasn't new, nor was the ring inside it just a simple band he'd carved from a piece of walnut, polished smooth with beeswax. He held it out, his voice quiet. "You want to make this forever?" Silva looked down at the ring, then at him. "I thought we already had." "We did," he said, "but I'd still like to ask." She took the ring and slid it on. "Then I still say yes." They married under the same cottonwood they'd planted. Corinne stood witness, holding Alma's hand while she scattered flower petals over the dirt. There was no preacher, only the land and the sky and the words they spoke with clear, steady voices. Illan promised her a life of truth, never easy but always honest. Silva promised him her heart, her steel, and her steadiness. After the vows, Illan lifted Alma onto his shoulders and carried her around the clearing while she giggled loud enough to startle the crows from the fence rail. By the first frost, the house stood square against the wind, its windows shuttered tight and its hearthstone warm. Silva filled the pantry with jars she'd canned herself, and Illan built Alma a bed with carved headposts shaped like river reeds. They spent their evenings around the fire, Alma curled against a quilt while Illan read aloud from an old trail journal he'd kept during the war. Silva listened, sewing quietly, her hand resting over his knee. Winter came hard, but the house held. Snow piled thick, but they had grain, meat, and dry wood. Illan taught Alma to track prints in the snow, and Silva began writing in a small-bound ledger notes on the land, planting times, roof pitch angles, things they could pass down. When spring finally broke through, Silva planted a line of beans beside the porch, and Alma named each hill after a wildflower. Illan dug post holes for a garden fence, his back bent and steady. Life moved forward, not loud, not rushed, just certain. Years passed, not all smooth, but none uncertain. They added a henhouse, then a smoke shed. Alma grew tall and quick-witted, her hair dark like her mother's, her hands always busy. She'd sit on the porch in the evenings, whittling or reading aloud while Illan and Silva rested with shoulders touching. They never needed many words. Their love wasn't built from grand declarations, but from days spent building side by side, from glances across supper tables, from hands finding each other in sleep. And when the years had lined Silva's face and silvered Illan's hair, they still walked the edge of their land together at dusk, the cottonwood grown tall behind them, its roots deep, its branches wide. They had built a life from what was broken, and it held, always.